Okay, we are recording and broadcasting. Madam Chair, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Welcome everyone to the September meeting of the Delta Independent Science Board. I am calling the meeting to order. First, I'll give a brief overview of the public comment process. Throughout the meeting, we will take written questions and comments. Please follow instructions on your screen and on the meeting notice. Now let's do the roll call of members to establish a quorum. Virginia?
Virginia Dale, no new conflicts.
Thanks. Tanya?
Tanya Heikela, no new declarations.
Tom?
Inga, I want to welcome you as chairman. You're doing a good job.
Thanks.
Tom Holzer, no declarations.
Diane will be a little bit late, so Anna?
Anna McCulloch, I have one new declaration. I was recently named a distinguished visiting scientist at Schmidt Sciences, which is a philanthropy that I had previously discussed working with in developing their programs and funding research in water and in carbon. And then this new title just means that I'll be working with them somewhat closer, but doing much of the same work.
Congratulations. Bob?
Bob Nyman, no new declarations.
Obi? Do we have Obi?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry, I was muted. Jayanta Vesekara, no new declarations.
Kenny?
Kenny Rose, no new declaration.
And Lisa?
Lisa Wanger, I have one new declaration. I have a research project focusing on the costs and benefits of HAB prevention and management, harmful algal blooms, that is. And we're doing interviews with state agencies all around the country, and it has put me in contact with some Delta agencies and California agencies. And I just want folks to know that this is a completely separate activity from the ISB. We're trying to show the costs and benefits of potential treatment options. So thanks.
Oh, thank you. And me, Inga Werner, I have no new declarations. All right. So I'll turn over to Margot Matson for housekeeping.
Hi there, just remind people that in an event of evacuation at the Natural Resources Building, everyone should remain calm and take all of your belongings and proceed to the nearest exit. Staff will gather at the evacuation point that's located at 1615 9th Street, and the public is welcome to join. Please note that there's no food or beverages allowed in the meeting room. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Margot. So I'll give a brief overview of the agenda today. So we will discuss the status of our reviews, including the Food Webs review, draft, and the draft memo on the Delta Conveyance Project, EIR. And we will discuss future activities. So now I want to ask if there are any public comments, Edmund?
There are none.
All right. So we'll come to agenda item 2, Delta ISB Chair's Report and Business Matters. And this is Tom already mentioned, this is my first meeting as chair of Delta Independent Science Board. I would like to take a moment to express my gratitude to Lisa Wanger for her service as chair during the past 2 years. And I look forward to working with her as past chair, along with Dr. Diane McKnight as the new chair-elect. And I'm really glad I'll have you by my side for the next 2 years, Lisa. Thank you. Under Dr. Wanger's exemplary leadership as chair, the board initiated critical thematic reviews such as decision-making under deep uncertainty and completed reviews of key documents, among them the draft EIR for the Delta Conveyance Project. As we look ahead, I'm excited about the work we will undertake together including completing the 3 thematic reviews on food webs, subsidence, and decision-making under deep uncertainty, and embarking on new reviews, including one on contaminant monitoring in the Delta. We'll discuss those new things later on today. So back to the chair's report. So in the future, we are planning to review and comment on the draft Delta Adapts adaptation plan and are awaiting the public release. Obi agreed to lead the draft. To draft the comment letter. Second, the Delta Stewardship Council has recently released the draft of its tribal and environmental justice paper for public review. The draft presents the council's understanding of tribal and environmental issues, justice issues in and around the Delta, and recommends actions to better address those issues within the scope of the council's mission, authority, and influence. The council staff will present the paper at our October meeting for discussion and feedback. Council staff will not be looking for formal written comment letters. However, the ISB is welcome to submit written comments during the public comment period, which is, the letters are due by November 4th, 2024. If anyone is interested in taking the lead in helping determine whether written comments are warranted, please let staff know. There will be a matching workshop There will be a matching workshop for the next California Sea Grant State Fellow from September 16th to 18th, next week. Dylan Chappell, Shoko Shinbrod, and Margot Matson will be participating in the matching process. We did not have a person from the ISB who could make the time. The schedule just didn't work out. But we gave Dylan some of the qualifications we're looking for, and I'm sure they will do a fantastic job in selecting a candidate. Specifically, we will be looking for someone who could contribute to the contaminant monitoring review and the climate change symposium. Again, this will be discussed later today. We received public correspondence since the last meeting. We received comments on the Bureau of Reclamation, Delta EIS on long-term operations of the Central Valley Project and State Water Project from the Sierra Club of California and other public organizations. There was one document with comments on the same topic from the Planning and Conservation League and other public organizations. And we received an announcement of a workshop on expert elicitation workshop on dimensions of uncertainty in CalSim 3 from Laura Larson. Are there any public comments?
There are none.
There are none. Okay, are there any questions or comments to public comments? Edmund? No?
No, there are none. Kenny has one. Kenny has one.
Yeah, if people didn't make the connection, I think those comments from those groups are not on the EIR, right? But they're on the long-term operations, which is the review I was involved with before joining the ISB.
Yes, on the long-term operations.
Yeah,
yes.
it's confusing. So that was the review that we considered when we were responding to the EIR. And that review was presented to the National Academy of Sciences Committee I guess a month or two ago as a presentation. I just want to, it's long-term operations and EIR can get confusing, so.
Yes, yeah. Thank you for that clarification, Kenny. Next agenda item, we are excited to have Dr. Rosemary Hartman of the California Department of Water Resources here to give a presentation. She will provide an overview of the Interagency Ecological Program food web synthesis effort. And I'll just give a little bit of background here before she starts. This effort is building on the Delta ISB's draft food webs review. The interagency, oh, I'm sorry. So the Interagency Ecological Program is organizing a food webs synthesis team building on the ISB's review. Dr. Hartman will speak about the new synthesis effort and how it plans to address some of the Delta ISB's preliminary recommendations. A proposal is part of your meeting package. So, Dr. Hartman, I cannot see the
I'm here.
There it is,
I can go
yes.
ahead and share my screen whenever you're ready.
Yes, please. We're very pleased to have you here. Thank you.
All right,
Go
thanks
ahead.
for having me. Yeah, so back in last fall, there was a great symposium put on as part of the ISB's Food Web Review. And that there was another Food Web Symposium that the Delta Science Program put on in May. And in both symposiums, there was a lot of talk about needing to kind of organize the food web science in the Delta a little more, like get a team together to really plan out what food web science in the Delta should look like. And I said, well, my job is putting together teams of scientists to like integrate data and answer big questions. So, this is something that the IEP synthesis team could probably tackle. The ISB put out their preliminary recommendations in April, and I just saw they have an updated draft. Really appreciate them taking into account some of the comments the DWR provided on that earlier draft. But some of the major recommendations include having a dedicated team to develop a food web science strategy, more data. You always need more data, more studies. Certain areas of the food web are particularly understudied. But where I felt that a synthesis team could really help is in the development of more quantitative models of Delta food webs and linking those models to adaptive management of various aspects of the Delta. So, building a quantitative model does require data, and that's where the amount of data we have tends to vary depending on who you talk to. I sort of am putting food web science into 3 basic categories because we have lots and lots of data on how many fish are out there. That we got pretty well covered. But when we talk about web data in particular, that is usually meaning studies that quantify food web connections or models that try and replicate those food web connections, not just standing stock of the different things, but how they interact. So in terms of food web connections, we have tons and tons and tons of fish diet studies. Most of these are kind of short-term one-off studies. We don't have a ton of like long-term monitoring. However, since about 2006, the CFW's Diet and Condition Lab has been studying diets of a number of different fishes, in particular Delta smelt and longfin smelt. But this is just a handful of the citations of fish diet studies in the Delta. We have less data on invertebrate diets, and a lot of it's kind of contradictory. Dissecting a fish and counting which critters it's eaten is hard. Doing that to a copepod that's too small to see with your naked eye is even harder. Fortunately, we've had a lot of, leaps and bounds, really, of methods for using DNA and other molecular techniques to quantify diets of some of these harder to measure critters. But as I said, some of it gets contradictory. Some early work suggests that all the major zooplankton in the Delta are really just eating phytoplankton, not detritus or anything else. Later studies say, well, they're also eating a lot of like ciliates and smaller phytoplankton. And actually, they're eating quite a bit of detritus. And some of the types of phytoplankton we thought weren't good, like cyanobacteria, they're eating a lot of that too. So a lot of work in progress, a lot still not known about this end of things. The other kind of data that we frequently use to quantify food web connections is stable isotopes. So stable isotopes of carbon and nitrogen can tell you approximately where on the food chain a taxa lies. You know, is it a primary producer? Is it a consumer? Is it a secondary consumer? And then what kind of carbon is it getting? Is it getting carbon that originally came from phytoplankton? Or originally from vascular plants? Is it, C4 versus C3 plants, terrestrial versus aquatic? You can parse apart a lot of that using stable isotopes. You can't tell exactly what a critter ate, but you can tell where its carbon came from and about where on the food web it lies. So some of those big picture connections can get you here, and we've learned a lot from those. Again, mostly this is special studies. It's takes very specialized knowledge and is quite labor intensive to do these kind of studies. It's not something that's in our long-term monitoring. With all of these one-off studies, we can put them together, in our heads into conceptual models. So, box and arrow diagrams. IEP loves our box and arrow diagrams to kind of tell us how we think the system works. And there have been a number of published conceptual models of the Delta food web. Durand 2015 looked at the pelagic food web, tried to tie together all the connections. One thing I like about this one in particular is that it doesn't just focus on the things we have good data for, but it has boxes for like detritus and the microbial loop. We don't really have data, but it's probably important. And it gets hydromedusae in there, jellyfish. They're a bit of a black box. We don't know a lot about their role in the ecosystem. It's another story. Brown 2016 tried to make more linkages between the pelagic habitat that Durand described and tidal wetlands, submerged aquatic vegetation, the benthic habitat. Because, we really have a dynamic estuary where it's not all about the pelagic zone. Sherman et al. 2017 had a very complicated conceptual model of tidal wetlands specifically because we have all of this restoration of tidal wetlands. And this is an area where traditionally we didn't have a lot of monitoring. That's really improved in recent years. But knowing how tidal wetlands work and how they connect to the rest of the estuary is one of the hot topics right now. And that's something that I think our synthesis team wants to start with our quantitative models. Existing quantitative models tend to be, just a part of the ecosystem at a time. Some of the biggest food webby models that we have to do with the relationship between clams, phytoplankton, and zooplankton, water depth, etc., work by Lucas and Thompson. But it tends to stop at zooplankton. It doesn't scale up to the fish and other critters. We also have a number of fish models that also incorporate zooplankton and sometimes other fish. However, it tends to be sort of a one-way relationship. So more zooplankton mean more delta smelt, but there's no sort of feedback loop like you would get in most food web models of fish grazing on those zooplankton and potentially reducing their levels. Still, useful ideas on how zooplankton relate to fish. There's also quite a few models of fish and predatory fish. How much of our predatory fish are, how much are they eating? Are they negatively affecting the prey populations, etc.? There's also been a couple of models trying to describe more of the whole food web, particularly the pelagic food web. McNally et al. Back in 2010 had a model trying to use a food web modeling structure to gain more insight into the pelagic organism decline of the early 2000s. And then just recently, Rogers et al., through a special synthesis team put together by the Delta Science Program and coordinated by the National Center for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis, put together a model trying to take all the data we have in the Delta and create a food web model to decide, okay, where and when do we have top-down control of populations? Where and when do we have bottom-up control? Really super cool paper. It was, however, at a pretty high level. You know, we just had estuary and forage fishers as a block. We didn't break apart they didn't break apart delta smelt versus shad versus top smelt. And they couldn't incorporate all of the aspects of the food web. They didn't have great data on predatory fish. We don't have those jellyfish in here at all. And it was just the pelagic zone. So it was a really cool paper to see where those drivers were, but it did not focus on specific management questions either. We also have lots of work in progress, more isotope studies, more diet studies, more modeling studies, in particular, a ecopath with ecosim modeling effort is going on in a couple of tidal wetlands led by Dr. Matt Young from USGS. Really cool food web models, but it's very data hungry and really only useful at a small scale area where we've had really intensive monitoring. Can't really be scaled up. So I feel like there's sort of a niche for a model that is at a little higher level than the ecopath models, but a little lower level than the Rogers et al. That can look at specific species and answer specific management questions. So what I am proposing is a new IEP synthesis team, getting a large team with diverse expertise. I already have a list of 10 or 15 people who are interested in helping out with this. Identify which research topics and management questions to tackle. I've already started shopping this around to different management teams, and we have kind of focused in on tidal wetlands and the benefits of tidal wetlands to listed fish as a potential research topic. Research modeling frameworks. This is not something I have a ton of experience personally, but working with people who have more experience, doing a lot of literature review. How do you build a food web model? And we'll probably end up identifying data gaps where we can't build the model we want to because we don't have enough data in certain places. But once we have inventoried the data and identified some models that work with the data and work with our questions, we can actually implement some models. So in terms of management needs, as I mentioned, the team thinks that starting with the benefits of tidal wetlands to at-risk fish might be a good place to start. It's relatively small in scope, you know, it's just wetlands, not the entire delta. It's an area where we have a lot of data that has just been collected recently over the past 5 to 10 years. The amount of wetland data has really increased and hasn't been analyzed to its full extent. And as I mentioned, it's a hot topic. A lot of people are really interested in it. But there are other topics that could be appropriate for food web models. So I've been talking to different management groups saying like, hey, should we focus on some of these other ones first? These are definitely things that if we come up with a good framework, we could tackle later, such as spatial and temporal habitat value. So why is the South Delta so bad for most native fish? And is Sassoon Marsh really a good place for delta smelt in the fall? Those kind of questions. Predation. So is a predation really a limiting factor for fish of interest? And would things like changing fishing regulations have an impact? What's limiting salmon survival through the South Delta? Is it temperature? Is it food? Is it predation? How is invasive vegetation affecting the food web? Would control of invasive vegetation be a way to change how the food web functions? Harmful algal blooms, what drives them? when do they occur, and do they have an impact on the rest of the food web? And then climate change could be layered on top of almost any of these questions. So if we say, okay, how do tidal wetlands work now? How will they work in the future under climate change? So right now, my team has done a lot of brainstorming, and we've kind of split into some groups. I am leading up the management review of these research topics. That's why I'm here today. Another group is starting a data inventory of all the wetland data that we have. What's already integrated? What do we need to integrate? And another team is researching those modeling methods. Once we have things kind of lined out in terms of our questions and our data, we'll do some conceptual modeling, box and arrow diagrams, and then try and apply some of those quantitative models to our conceptual models. We'll end up with results that will hopefully include answers to those management questions. They're never going to be definitive, yes, this is the answer, but a helpful steps in that direction, and probably some data gaps where we need additional studies, some recommendations for future studies. And there'll probably be a couple of iterations of those management questions where we take it to the folks who might use it, like the Fish Restoration Program, and they say, well, what about such and such? And we go back and tweak some things. For our data inventory, we're looking potentially having some kind of like visualization of it where we can see not only what data do we have, when do we have it, and where do we have it in space and time. Focusing especially on some of those wetland data sets that haven't been integrated in the past. Modeling methods, as I mentioned, there's a lot. We haven't dug into this too much. Structural equation models are an option, multiple autoregressive space state models, just having some population models that are linked in some way. We may want to incorporate some biogeochemical models at the base of the food web. And depending on expertise and our data availability, we may end up kind of falling back on some more sort of back of the envelope calculations. Learn et al. In 2021 put out a really interesting paper where they just made a lot of assumptions about general amounts of carbon produced in different habitat types to come up with an estimate of carbon lost in when tidal wetlands in the Delta were destroyed. So that kind of method is one way we could go if we can't create a more detailed model. So that's all I have, but just wanted to get feedback on, is wetlands an appropriate space to start? Are there specific questions we should be focusing on? Any other higher priority needs, or any ideas for other people to talk to, other people to invite to join the group, or other modeling methods?
Thanks very much, Rosie, for this presentation. It sounds very exciting. And it's fantastic that the DISB review already triggered such an effort. So I see lots of questions, lots of raised hands, and I didn't see who raised them first. So please forgive me. I'm going one after the other. Kenny, you had a question.
Yeah, sure. No, that looks great. One thing is that, you know, when you're building these food web models of wetlands and other habitats, a lot of the information is not site specific. That is, you can't just look at the data that's been collected in the Delta on wetlands. In fact, when we did wetland food web models in Louisiana, we used information from many places outside of Louisiana. So what I wasn't seeing was there are site-specific drivers and data you need, and then there's more general, not site-specific, but quantitative data you need. And that is, of course, more of a challenge to synthesize because it all depends on the scale of the model and how you put it together. But I wouldn't only look in the Delta. if you wanted to quantify these relationships. Fish feeding is fish feeding. Now the prey available, how they grow might be location or site dependent or system dependent, but the rates, as you said, you're switching from looking at standing stocks to rates. The rates, we use bioenergetic models. The Delta smelt model you cited me for, that started as a bioenergetics model in Lake Michigan. Right. So I just wanted to make sure you didn't get to put up too much guardrails around Delta data only. And the way to solve that is you get about 8 of the right people in a room, and they'll know a lot of what's going on outside of the Delta, and maybe a few more than that. But anyway, I just wanted to point out that building of these models is not only site-specific data.
Yeah, we can definitely incorporate outside data when it's appropriate. I would, though, like to get that in writing so I can use it to reply to the reviewer on this other paper that I am writing. There's like, why are you citing all this stuff from outside the Delta that's on wetlands? It's like, because it's relevant. I do want to start with, data from our system because, we can't necessarily assume that fish feeding in Spartina is going to be the same as fish feeding in Tules because, there's very structurally different habitat. But it is definitely going to be probably necessary to borrow from other systems where we can and when it's appropriate to fill in some of those gaps and make sure that it kind of puts bounds on okay, if all the other systems, these are the rates we're seeing, in our system we're seeing something completely different, then maybe we need to double check what we're doing.
Yeah, again, it still sounds like to me you're too limited by local data, but we can discuss that if you want. For calibration and validation, absolutely. For model formulation, less so. But others
take that into consideration.
Yeah, and others may disagree with me as well. So
yeah.
All right. Let's hear from Bob. He has his hand raised. So.
No, I think this is a great idea, Rosemary. I'm really pleased to see that you're, putting the energy into it and taking the responsibility to, pull the group together. So, kudos to you on that front. I do have just a couple of kind of pragmatic suggestions for you at this stage. Is in looking over the proposal, I realize it's an early draft. One of the things that jumped out at me is that looks like you have, good people there. Well, you do have good people there, but you're only asking for 5 to 20% of their time over about 2 years. And I've run into this before in other situations, and that's not enough. I can understand in terms of, how the agencies might react to 5% or 20% and so forth. But in reality, I think you need more. I would say at a minimum, it's 10% and probably as much as 40%, so that people are really engaged on almost a daily basis. They're thinking about their activities. So that's one thing I would throw out is, in my experience, it's every time we've done this, it's taken much more than a relatively small percentage of people's time. The second pragmatic suggestion is that if I remember right, the proposal was limited to about 2 years. And I assume you're going for a proof of concept. And a couple thoughts there is 2 years might not be enough for proof of concept. I think I'd probably say 3, but maybe you need it 2 years just to sell it, but I think you need a little bit more time just because of the startup issues that come about. And then it seems to me you need a very pragmatic proof of concept, something to put out there and say, this is really what we're going to do. And maybe the proposal is doing that implicitly, but it didn't jump out at me as, maybe it's just putting the team together and getting the team to work together. It's, that's what you accomplish after a couple of years. But then to give folks some idea, okay, let's say you get a proof of concept. What are the next steps? What are the possibly might be the follow-up steps beyond 2 years? And what benefits might accrue from these steps? So it gives people a sense of hope in a way that, this is really going to lead to something very important. And so anyway, those are my thoughts. I'm really happy to see you doing this, and certainly happy to help in any way that I can. And I just, wish you the best on it. So go for it.
Thanks. Yeah. And in terms of timeline, in my experience, I like setting very aggressive timelines to get people moving. And they almost always slip. So I figured I'm going to say it's going to take about 2 years. And then when other people's primary duties come up and things slow down, we can adjust the timeline out a little further, aiming for that 3-year mark. I shouldn't even say that out loud. We're going to get it done in 2 years. I definitely, in leading some of these teams, while, more time is always good, having too much time, you end up with endless discussions. And we need to try some stuff. It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be awesome, but just like getting, like you said, that proof of concept. And it isn't really articulated well in the proposal, because part of what I'm doing right now is getting information to refine that proposal, like which exact management question in terms of wetlands is going to be the most useful for that proof of concept. So I met with the fish restoration program yesterday, actually, and they were really lining out like, okay, can we see differences between like large sites and small sites? Or can we quantify, how much are Delta smelt and salmon eating in these wetlands? Things like that. So this is kind of the early like, hey, how about we put together a team to try out some of this stuff proposal? It's going to get refined a little more. I don't want to promise too much for what will happen after the proof of concept, because I need to see if I can prove it first. And then we can talk about next steps. Yeah.
And I understand where you're coming from, and maybe I've done the same thing myself in the past. But the other thing that kind of did jump out at me a bit, and I believe that I understand where you're coming from in terms of the management needs, is I thought they were a little narrow, but that's okay. I mean, that's because I guess from where I sit, I think about things like, what's the biophysical basis for fish production in a system? I want to understand the principles that drive fish production or fish biomass in a system. But that's oftentimes too esoteric for a management question, or what managers need. They need to get their hands around something. So anyway, as time goes on, I would be looking at it in more of I guess more of a general quantitative model, but something that allows us to answer bigger questions. But I understand that there's the management needs where, in a pragmatic sense, you need information to be applied relatively soon. So anyway, that's a longer discussion that I'm sure over the next year or two we can follow up on. Anyway, good luck.
Thank you.
We're behind you.
Excellent.
I hope you can follow up. Obi, you had
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Rosemary. I think I'm very happy to see that, kudos to you and your team for initiating this. I'm trying, from your presentation, I'm trying to understand the high level, longer term vision for this. from your explanation of the conceptual models, it seems like they are in various degrees of development or understanding. You have several scales of, I guess, conceptual models that you mentioned. And it seems like and correct me if I'm wrong, if I understand correctly, you're trying to develop models for, individual pieces or spatially explicit model, and eventually somehow all this will be connected to a, broader system-wide model. And I was, so that's one comment, one question, what is your long-term vision for this food web model development? The second is, you said you have a lot of data, and I was wondering if data mining using AI or machine learning methods at the systems level is another approach that you have discussed or contemplated. And even if you don't have the tools, I can make comparison to Everglades landscape model if you know anything about it. And that's kind of how we got started here. So, sometimes you use rule-based, approaches since you don't have the full physics of what's happening. So I was wondering if there a top-down model is also being thought about in addition to these bottom-up models that you seem to. And correct me if my understanding is, wrong. Thank you.
Not exactly sure what you mean by top-down versus bottom-up. The idea is that we are going to incorporate both, predation, top-down effects and bottom-up effects into this model. And in terms of long-term vision, with this kind of proof of concept in wetlands, like figure out what modeling methods work and how we can parameterize them to answer the question, how much production do tidal wetlands provide for listed fishes, and then see if we can adapt that basic modeling structure to other questions like salmon survival through the South Delta or, smelt habitat in the fall. But I think a lot of it is going to be a learning process. I have sort of a conceptual vision of some kind of modeling framework that can be applied to multiple different management questions, and having it really be management focused. Some of the larger questions about, okay, what drives fish productivity? What are the carbon flow through the entire system? I think we'll be able to get some of those more academic questions out of this, but making sure that we can actually address the concrete management relevant topics that my management wants. In terms of AI and machine learning, like that's definitely a modeling structure that we can look into. There's been some really interesting machine learning models put towards salvage data recently, and some other places. First, we're going to have to get the data organized into a similar structure before we can try some of those machine learning models. But that definitely could be a potential way of looking at things. However, we need to have that, figure out what the structure is before we can just throw AI at it. I think that answered all of your questions. Or most of them.
Yeah, no, in terms of, top down, what I meant was, it's sometimes you want to put together, basically spatially explicit models that are connected in some way. And it might be not be perfect, but you learn a lot from them, what interactions are important and so forth. So that's what I meant by top down. But anyway, yeah, I think you answered my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Lisa has her hand up. Lisa, go.
Yeah, thanks. Rosemary, thanks. I think this approach looks wonderful. And again, just want to express our gratitude for you carrying the water on this. So I think you've partially answered my comments from Ove, but let me just go ahead and restate them my way and see if you agree. So I think what I'm hearing is a big focus on what's controllable in the system. So the management relevant is, well, I could understand a bunch of things, but what can I actually control? And the only thing I would encourage you to do is maybe consider whether you've really bounded those questions by understanding what's uncontrollable. And I'm imagining maybe just one of your brainstorming sessions goes to this tool, this back of the envelope type tool, because this is what we do a lot in economics is, well, where should we devote our resources to studying the system? And, throw out all the crazy, like, have a real broad brainstorming session just to make sure you're really bringing in new ideas about how the system works. And then doing some back of the envelope, best professional judgment kind of estimates of, if we were right about this, what's the biggest effect it could have on the fish population, or, however you want to bound it. And then I think you just make sure that you're not missing some important piece that maybe hasn't been a big topic in the past, because I think that's something that the ISB review is trying to get folks to think about. There has been a lot of like, where does the food come from? Who does it get to? And I think we were just wondering whether there might be other questions at other scales.
It's a very good idea. We can have it. That sounds like a really fun brainstorm too, for sure.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Rosie. I don't see any other hands up. No more follow-up questions from the board? No? Well, again, thanks for the presentation and thanks for the effort. We're very excited about it. So all that is left for me to do here is ask if there are public comments, Edmund.
There are no public comments or questions for this agenda item.
All right. In that case, thanks again.
Thank you all.
Hopefully you will achieve your goals and in the time frame you're striving for. Sounds like you have a good plan. And I'm sure you get a lot of input from the people who spoke up today. Thanks. So that brings us to the next agenda item 4, to the actual food webs review that triggered all of this effort led by Bob Nyman. And I just want to give some background for those who haven't heard this before. The Delta ISB recently received public comments on the draft review titled, and this title has changed in a new version, Exploring Scientific and Management Implications of Upper Trophic Level Food Webs in the Delta. The draft was based on a literature review on the subject, public comments on the prospectus, and comments received at Delta ISB meetings, and also a focused 2-day workshop. A revised report which addresses public comments is part of your meeting package. We will have a discussion on the revised draft and determine if it is ready to be finalized after potential additional comments are addressed. I would like to turn over to Bob now for an overview of the revised report and to lead the discussion on it.
Okay, well, thank you, Inga. As you know, the last couple of months have really been spent, taking all the public and public comments and revising the report, in some cases rather extensively. And the version that you have in front of you is one that was actually sent to Edmund and to Lauren for editing. And today, of course, I'll any additional comments that you might have would certainly be welcome. I fervently hope there's not too many of them, but we'd really like to wrap this up. And before I begin, just to remind you that we will be giving a presentation on this at the Bay Delta conference that occurs right at the end of September, first couple of days of October. So anyway, I hope to see most of you, if not all of you, in the audience for that. So we did receive quite a number of comments, and as I said in our last meeting, I spent a lot of time, not only myself but others on the board, addressing these comments and revising the document to the point and the one that, you received the other day. And in my mind, there were really kind of four major categories of comments. And I'd like to go through those, what I consider to be, in my mind, those major categories, and just tell you, how we address those. So the first category of comment really had to do with the scope of the report. The original title implied that the document was tightly focused on, quote, upper trophic levels, unquote, and especially fishes. However, several reviewers pointed out the actual activities involved in, coming to this point in the report, and the report in itself, in effect, what it had examined was really the biophysical basis for biotic interactions and production of fishes in the Delta. And because of that, the original title was slightly modified to reflect this more comprehensive perspective. Now, hopefully you would agree with the modified title. I hope you do. If not, that's fine. We can change it to whatever folks would like. The second major category of comment that we received was that, quite a number of the reviewers felt that more emphasis and information was needed on modeling approaches, especially with EcoPath and EcoSem. And thankfully, Kenny Rose provided an added emphasis on the various modeling approaches and how they could be applied to issues in the Delta. And because of this, two new sections, one short and one a little bit longer, were added. One on complexity, prediction, and uncertainty in food web modeling, and then another on how to proceed in the Delta with the modeling approaches. The third major category of revisions and comments, or revisions in response to the comments that took place, was it was pointed out by numerous folks that considerable research, data management, and synthesis, and we heard that from Rosemary a few minutes ago, are currently being conducted to understand major aspects of the Delta's food webs. These, and I agree with these comments, they were not acknowledged as well as they should have been in the original version of the report. And in the current version that you have, these ongoing activities have been included substantially. I can't think of any that we know of that have been left out. There may be some out there that we don't know of, but I assume that there are relatively few. And then finally, the last major category that the reviewers brought up was that there were additional important gaps in understanding components such as birds and mammals, processes such as decomposition, and methods such as stable isotopes and some others that we did not identify adequately in the original report. And these were we did in our discussions, but they were not in the original report, and they were brought up again by the reviewers. The report you have in front of you was modified where appropriate, to identify these important gaps and to explain why they are included or why they are important in understanding food webs in the Delta. So anyway, those are the four major categories of comments that I felt we received, and you may have others. But we tried our very best to respond to each and every comment that was received and do it in a productive manner. And all in all, really, all of these comments actually, I think, helped us improve the report substantially overall. It really fleshed it out into something that I think we should all be proud of when it comes out as an ISB report. So anyway, I'll open it up to you if you have questions or comments on the report itself, things that you think should be modified. I'm all ears. Okay, Tom?
Yeah, I just want to say, I think you ended up with a good title. That the title actually caught my eye as the report evolved, and I noticed it changing. But I think you've ended up in a good place with the title.
Great, thank you. Other comments?
I'll just kind of second what Tom's saying is I think you brought a lot more clarity to the main points, and I think it's greatly improved. So I haven't made it all 100% through, but I don't appear to have any comments so far.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. Inga, your hands up first.
Yeah, I also wanted to say I really like the way it flows. I like it's very clear. The goals are clear, the recommendations. I also like the title, and I really like the boxes with the examples, but they were there in a different version as well. So congratulations. It was really fun reading it.
Oh, well, thank you, Inga. Appreciate that. Virginia?
Well, I too want to thank you for your effort. When I read the review comments, I thought these are really going to be hard to address. And you obviously, you and Kenny took the time and effort to do that. Not only is the title better, I think the executive summary is focused a lot better. And then when I looked at details on specific comments, I found that you had done a very balanced job in addressing them. I didn't read it cover to cover. I mainly looked for the review comments and how you addressed those. And congratulations on a good effort.
Great, thank you, Virginia. Much appreciated. Other thoughts? Well, this is almost too easy. Now, wait a minute.
Well, we do have to ask for public comments.
Oh, okay. All right. Very
Okay.
good.
Edmund, are there any public comments?
There are none.
All right.
Oh.
There you
So
go.
very good. Well, I assume if you have any editorial comments or small comments that were made, I guess, if you can send them to Edmund and myself so I can see them. I guess, Edmund, what's the next step here?
Yeah. So I know Lisa said she needed more time to read through the report. So there's two options that we can take. If enough ISB members feel they had enough time to review and don't have any major comments, we could take an action today to approve the current draft with any minor edits that might come in either from board members or the public, or we could wait until October to take a vote. And then once a vote is made, it'll probably take about 3 to 4 weeks to format it into a nice report template, and then we'll start the promotional process. So those are kind of like the next steps.
Well, I guess I would hope, oh, go ahead, Lisa.
I just want to clarify that I've looked at enough to know that I don't have any major comments. So just to put that in the hopper.
Okay, thank you. Well, I would encourage us to take a vote today. I'm going to be out of town a lot over the next month, and so it'd be nice to know that this can go forward and get it into Edmund's hands before I leave next week.
All right. Well, Virginia.
So I want to offer a motion that we agree to accept this report pending minor comments that may come from the ISB members so that the report can move ahead.
Thanks very much. Do we have a second?
I can second.
Anna, you seconded? All right, thank you. Okay, well, then we will take a vote. If after accommodating additional comments from the board, the report should be finalized and posted. So let me take the roll call. Virginia?
Yes.
I'm sorry, Inga, Edmund, do we need public comment again?
We
before-
don't if we already took it the first time.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Lauren. Okay, we got Virginia, Tanya,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes,
Anna.
Yes.
Oh, Diane, we still don't have Diane, but okay. Bob, no, Bob. Bob, can you vote? I'm not
Yes,
sure
I
if Bob
vote
can
yes.
vote. Obi,
Yes.
Kenny,
Yes.
Lisa,
Yes.
and myself, I vote. Can I vote? I'm not sure. Okay, yes. So the motion passes, and Bob will work with staff to finalize the report. Congratulations, Bob.
Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Well, now we have earned ourselves a 15-minute break. So we'll see you in 15 minutes, back in 15 minutes. All right, welcome back at the September meeting of the Delta Independent Science Board. Our member, Dr. McKnight, arrived, and I will do the roll call with her. Diane, do you have any new declarations?
No, I have no new declarations. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so next on the agenda is agenda item 5. We will update on the review on decision-making under deep uncertainty. And I will give a short background on that. So the review builds an understanding of the scientific tools and concepts that can increase the capacity to anticipate and adapt to growing uncertainty of future conditions in the Bay Delta system. The review has two main components: a seminar series, an inventory and analysis of scenario planning in the region. There will be a panel discussion on the topic and a presentation in a special session at the upcoming Bay Delta Science Conference. I'd like to turn over to Dr. Ranger and Lisa and Obi to provide an overview of their upcoming talks and session. First to Obi, maybe.
Thank you, Inga. So I have a talk on the morning of the last day, October 2nd at 8:30. And I'll be providing a talk on basically fundamentals of decision-making under deep uncertainty and how it could be used in Bay Delta. So I plan to talk about basically some sort of a discussion on the levels of uncertainty and how DMDU or deep uncertainty fits into that spectrum. And I will also talk about the tools or selected tools that would be used, that could be used for DMDU application. And I will show some examples and discuss some of the challenges in using DMDU in a system like Bay Delta.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you, Obi. Turn over to you, Lisa.
Thanks, Inga. And just if you're looking for that session with Obi in the program, it's the session that's been organized by Polk and Milligan, and it's got the title Post-Normal Decision Making, something like that. And then we on the ISB have arranged for a panel discussion on the last day of the conference same day as Obey, but at 3:30 p.m. And the session is going to provide an opportunity to learn about how various organizations address uncertainties in their management and the tools they use, and get some perspectives on decision-making and deep uncertainty from them. And we have a great group of panelists. We have Jeff Henderson from the Delta Stewardship Council, Felicia Marcus from Stanford University, who's also had a lot of experience in the public sector, Lindsay Correa, California Department of Water Resources, and Kathleen Schaefer of UC Davis. So we're really looking forward to that. And if folks are at the conference, we hope they'll join us. Yeah, and so I guess we ask for public comments now.
Yeah, that sounds great, Lisa. Thank you. Are there any public comments, Edmund?
There are none.
All right. So let's move on to agenda item 6. We'll discuss or get an update on the subsidence review. Tom, I'll hand over to you.
All right,
Or
thank
no,
you.
hang on. I have to provide some background first
Okay.
for those who are not familiar with it. On October, almost a year ago, on October 19th to 20th, 23, there was a public workshop in Sacramento which focused on basic and applied science that would improve management of subsided lands in the Delta. We approved a draft to be released for a formal public comment period at our last meeting, draft of the review. And I would like to hand over to Tom now, who can provide a status update.
Okay. And after our last meeting, we sent out the draft of the report to one of the Delta agency heads to get their reaction to it. And it was kind of interesting. It was more a tonal kind of response. What we hadn't really done very well in the report was explain that we're actually in sort of the implementation phase of these actions to manage the subsided lands. In the last year and a half, these projects have been funded. They were described at the workshop, but the problem was in the report. I think the reader was concerned that someone might read it that we're going too fast, that research is needed. And so we got quite a few helpful comments from him. And then I've gone through the report several times trying to pick out where those issues arise. And sometimes it'll be just a word referring to a project as an experiment, for example, is a trigger.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I've gone through the report a couple times now. I'm going to go through it one more time, and then I'm going to hand it off to Diane and Tanya to let them pick at it, because it is a little bit of a challenge. Once you start reading the report, you sort of maybe biased isn't the right word, but you sort of get locked into a certain perspective on it, and some of these word choices are kind of subtle. So anyway, that's where we are right now. I think I've done a pretty good job of getting rid of some of the subtle
All right.
messages that were there. But I've noticed each time I go back to it, I find a word here or there that could make quite a difference to the reader. So that's pretty much where we are right now.
All right. I'm sure if you go over it 5 more times, you will find 5 more words, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's always like that. Thank you, Tom. Are there any public comments?
There are none.
Thank you. All right, agenda item 7 is a discussion of the Delta Conveyance Project Final Environmental Impact Report review. just give some background on that. The California Department of Water Resources released the final environmental impact report for the Delta Conveyance Project on December 8th, 2023, and certified the report on December 21st, 2023. In August 2024, the Department of Water Resources transmitted to the State Water Resources Control Board an operations plan for the Delta Conveyance Project, describing project operations. The operations plan consolidates the information in one convenient location for presentation to the State Water Board and participants. In February 2024, DWR submitted a petition to the State Water Board for the change in point of diversion for existing State Water Project water rights to implement the Delta Conveyance Project. The operations plan was prepared to assist the public in better understanding how the new North Delta intakes will be operated. This operations plan is part of your meeting package for informational purposes. We discussed the final environmental impact report at our previous public meetings and will be submitting a memo on how our comments on the draft environmental impact report were addressed. All written comments were considered, and we have a draft for discussion at this meeting. We will discuss in this draft if this draft is ready to be submitted after potential additional comments are addressed. I would like to turn over to Lisa Wanger for an overview of the draft memo and to lead a discussion on it now. You have the word, Lisa.
Thanks, Inga. So yeah, you may remember we had a draft last time and we had quite a few comments, and I thank you all for very helpful comments. I did my best to address them all, and I got some help from some other board members. And most of those comments were to improve clarity of the language, including our intent with various statements. So there's been some reorganization of the document. I'll get to that next, but I would like to comment that I have removed some sentences. And really the problem was that some of our sentences could be interpreted as saying that we were judging whether the science was compliant with CEQA, which, you know, it's not really our job. Our job is to weigh in on the adequacy of the science. And so I haven't really removed any substance of the comments, just changed the language and removed reference to CEQA in some places. Just to clarify that our comments are that analyses, you know, that what we saw was a lack of analyses that would be needed to reduce uncertainty or prevent bias or include some effects we thought were important. So some of those could be missing. So the intent of the comments is still there. Another big change is that several of you had concerns that about including the text that was similar to comments in the effects review of the Bureau of Reclamation's operations, and that had been conducted by the Delta Science Program. So, and most of that was in the appendix. So given the concerns, I removed all the appendix text. It was more specific than our original comments. You know, our thinking to put it in was that it added some good specifics, but given that we hadn't made those original comments, it probably was more appropriate to take it out. But I did retain the statements where we noted similarities or overlap of statements between what we're saying in our comments and also in that effects review. And then the other big change, so given that a lot of material was removed from the appendix, it became easier to integrate all the appendix text back into the main document under the main themes. So nothing substantial was removed, just things were moved around where they fit best under those themes. So that's really how those comments were addressed, the main ones. So I welcome any further comments from folks who've had a chance to look at it.
Bob has his hand up.
Oh, Bob, please go ahead.
Lisa, I think you did a really nice job in revising this. It, you know, it really, I guess, you know, speaks to the inadequacy of the report, the EIS that was prepared, and the fact that it included examples of where those inadequacies might be. I think that helped it quite a bit. And I agree wholeheartedly with, you know, taking out any references to the Delta Science Program report. And, you know, the report really should be just from us now. It's our opinion of what went on. So I don't have any major problems with it. I think it reads well. It's to the point, and hopefully for those who read it outside of our board and use it in subsequent processes and hearings and so on, that if they have any questions, that they'll contact us for some clarity if need be. So anyway, good job. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Bob. Tanya.
Yeah, I'll just echo what Bob said. I think you've done a really nice job in the edits here, Lisa. I think it reads clearly and the language changes make good sense, and I think it's sharper now. So appreciate your hard work on that.
Thanks. Obey.
So I also agree with Bob and Tanya that I think this new letter reads much better, and I'm glad about the changes we actually made to the letter. Now I think we are clear about what our intent was in reviewing the EIR. Thank you.
Thank you, Obey. Yeah, it made a lot more sense to me on seeing it fresh and with your comments to see how things could be integrated a little better. So I think we improved it. So no more board comments. Then I guess we ask, well, let's see, what do we do?
We ask for a motion.
Yeah, there you go. Inga, I'll let you take over. I thought it was public comments again, but yeah, it's up to you.
No, we ask for a motion if the letter should just be revised according to comments received today and then finalized and sent out. Anybody? Tanya?
I'd like to move that the letter be finalized and sent out with any minor revisions that may come up due to final public comments today.
Okay.
Thank
you, Tanya. Thank you, Virginia. Okay, then let's take the vote.
We need public.
Virginia?
Public comment.
No. Doesn't come until later, right? Public comments now?
If we're voting on something, we need to take public comments before a vote.
Okay, thank you. Do we?
There are no public comments.
Edmund?
There are no public comments.
Thank you. All right, let's vote then. Virginia?
Yes.
Tanya?
Yes.
Tom?
Yes.
Anna?
Yes.
Diane?
Yes.
Bob?
Yes.
Obi?
Yes.
Kenny?
Yes.
Lisa?
Bring in the enthusiasm. Yes.
And I vote yes as well. So the motion passes. Lisa will work with staff to finalize the memo, and then it will be sent out. Are there any public comments?
There are none.
Thank you. Wonderful. So we come to agenda item 8, future activities. And we are currently in the process of wrapping up the 4 documents discussed today. We need to continue planning out our future activities, as this process can take some time. And we will use this time to discuss two current ideas, which we have discussed a little bit before as well. The contaminants review. I say contaminants because I would really like to call it contaminant monitoring review, and a symposium on emerging climate science research. We will take public comments after the discussions. So the contaminants review is my topic. The preliminary goals are to assess if current contaminant monitoring and risk assessment is capable of detecting threats to contaminants to the ecological health of the Delta. And I might add to answer management questions. The main focus will be on surface water and risk assessment for aquatic species. And it will also include a review of tools and methods to address the complexity of linking contaminant monitoring data to ecological health. So there's definitely an educational component in there. That's the intention, but we are still in the scoping phase. We have set up some scoping discussions with 3 experts, which will take place in October after our next meeting. And we hope to narrow down the focus based on, in part, on those discussions. That's all I can update you on this. That's the progress so far. Do you have any questions? No question. Oh, Bob. Go ahead.
Inga, and all. I don't recall if there's a kind of a summary memo or an initial prospectus on this activity. Has one been prepared, or am I just blocking it out?
I think I'm blocking it out because we sent out a draft prospectus last month, which was a little bit premature because it wasn't really ready to be commented on. It was just to show the status. And this was only sent, of course, to the people who were interested in being part of the team. We just wanted to show you where we were, essentially. But I haven't really, the whole summer, I haven't really had time to focus on this. So once I'm back in California, which is at the end of next week, I will put more time into it, and we will try to come up with a complete draft that we will then, send out for comments.
Okay, well, that would be great. I recall it now. Looking at it briefly, but it really would, I think, be useful for not only for myself, but for, I assume, for others to see even a rough draft that kind of lays out the strategy for this activity. And
yeah,
if you can do that.
There really hasn't been that much progress. As I always say, I mean, there hasn't been much time put into this so far from my side. So that's why I'm saying, we're doing these scoping discussions now. Basically, I need to hear from people who work in the system, who work on this topic in the system, what is relevant, which, I need some input for the focus and all of that. And you also will be part of these discussions, right? You said you were going to be there online.
Well, I'll try my best to listen in.
Yeah.
I'll try my best. We can discuss that later, but I will try to listen in.
yeah, we're bringing it up at each meeting, but I'm really not quite ready. So, Diane?
I wanted to say that in looking over the final version of the food web perspective report, I was thinking about how there are ways in which this food web perspective could be brought in to thinking about prioritizing contaminants and target organisms. So we could walk the talk in this report in terms of the as referring to that framework in some way in terms of the issues of monitoring and particular key vulnerabilities. So I just wanted to bring that up.
I agree with you. Yeah, and it's been my thought too. Of course, you want to find the weakest links and make sure that those are okay. So definitely a connection to the food web. I agree with you. Yeah, Tanya, go ahead.
Yeah, just a couple suggestions as we get this started, since we're very much in the preliminary stages, Inga. You know, we often have folks come and speak to the board about the kind of state of some of the issues that to help inform how we think about prospective reviews. And I'm wondering if when we do these kind of preliminary scoping discussions, if there's folks that we could bring to the full board to really help us better understand kind of the big picture related to contaminants and what some of the current issues are that we should be thinking about as a board. I think that could just be helpful for me. And then the other thing kind of related to Diane's suggestion about the tying in to the food webs review. We also have the monitoring enterprise review from a few years back that is much broader, of course, but if we're going to focus more on the monitoring side of this, we might want to kind of dig through that past review and look to see what, if any, suggestions from that could inform how we think about this more specific review.
Yeah, those are really good points, Tanya. I have, but it was more than a year ago, actually read that monitoring review. And it's also very helpful because it pulls together all the websites and resources on monitoring that are out there. So it's actually a great base to start off from. And yeah, those are very good points. And bringing in somebody to talk about contaminants issues in the Delta would also be a good idea. Yeah, sounds great. All right, very good input. I think that was maybe it. Okay, so we will inform you once these scoping discussions are done, and we can narrow things down a bit and focus in on the things that are really important in the Delta. And we'll keep you in the loop. The other thing that is that we're planning is a symposium on emerging climate science research. There was interest expressed at the June meeting to organize a symposium on the state of climate change research and how organizations are taking climate change into consideration. The current goal is to have a workshop in early 2025. Obi and Anna agreed to take the lead and will draft a prospectus with staff. Do you have any updates, Obi, Anna, or are there any questions?
I'll start. I'll comment where we are, and maybe Anna can chime in after that. So I think we have a good start of a prospectus. I think staff has prepared a nice called Emerging Climate Research Symposium Considerations for the Bay Delta region. We know with our work on the decision making under deep uncertainty, climate change is going to be an important topic, and particularly in an environment where the research is rapidly evolving. And I think the goal of this symposium is to understand, what are the, future projections that we can use, with the range of uncertainties that are associated with that. So personally, I'm interested in understanding from the actual experts who are working in Bay Delta region, who have done work on climate change research, to understand what are the drivers, what are the scenarios that we should be thinking about based on the current science, I think. That's kind of what I'm interested in, looking at what would happen to both, extremes, very wet periods like due to atmospheric rivers, or very dry periods, drought or mega droughts in the future. I think that's what we want to hear from these experts at the symposium. And then trying to understand some of the uncertainties associated with that. That's kind of my, my interest, but I think, Anna, you want to chime in and maybe add to it, or?
Sure. I don't know, Tom, did you want to chime? You have your hand raised. Do you want to ask a question before I comment, or do you want to wait? You're muted. You're muted, Tom. We can't hear you.
Go ahead, and if you end up covering it, then I won't have to ask.
Okay, sure. I doubt I'll cover it. What I was going to say is it seems like from the preliminary exchange with staff, there's some question as to how broadly to define the scope of this workshop. What Obey described is the a very focused topic, and at least in the initial draft, the topic was broader and included management and other aspects as well. And so I think we need to do a little bit more thinking on how do we define the bounds of it. And then another related topic is, we can either try to really define the scope ourselves and then think about speakers to engage. But another way that we could proceed is for that core component, as Obi described, we could actually start to have conversations, reach out to potential speakers, and actually let feedback from them actually inform what it would be a natural boundary of the scope of what we would do. And so I guess for the group, and maybe Tom, this is part of what you're getting at already, I would appreciate hearing what others would find most helpful in terms of the outer boundary of what the scope of this workshop would be.
Tom has his hand still raised. Tom?
Yeah, you began to cover it, but you didn't, my question, but you didn't quite answer it in the end. One of the concerns I have about climate change and sea level rise is that the further you go out, the worse this problem gets. And there's a tendency to sort of solve the problem in 50 years and 100 years. But of course, if the planet keeps warming, which seems likely, we're going to have a even more severe situation. So my question is, have you thought at all about the time frame of the symposium?
So I said in most climate literature, we tend to talk about mid-century and late century, and that's the sort of typical timeframes that are covered. There are, of course, some groups doing research more on the 200 to 300 year types of horizons or longer. We could discuss that. Quite frankly, if off the top of my head, my personal perspective is, I think it's fair to say that if we look back 100 years, scientists would have had a really hard time imagining what today's society would look like and what the state of technology would be. And I think the same is true going forward. And so while it's scientifically interesting to go beyond the 100-year timeframe. Other uncertainties related to how human society will evolve become so great that I'm not sure for the purposes of what we're talking about here, it's quite as relevant, but certainly I'm personally open to other people's perspectives as well.
Yeah, I would argue
Tom-
that it's very relevant because we're talking about the delta, so that the sea level rise can devastate the delta. And currently, our primary solution to the water problem in the delta is levees. And at
Right.
some point, it probably would become impractical. So at least having some idea that this bad future is out there is, I think, important for planning. It's not very well accommodated today.
Yep.
Hey, Tom, a real
Sure. I mean, I
very
think
quick.
maybe just quickly, I think it would be absolutely interesting and relevant to have one speaker speak on the topic of, for example, going beyond late century projections. Maybe it would be a title or a theme.
Yeah.
I think, Tom, I think you're raising an important point. I mean, this is very much related to our DMDU discussion, like in the long run, and those, wild cards or beyond 21st century. I've seen projections up to 2150 in many agencies. So I think understanding the progression or trajectory of uncertainties beyond even 2100 is important in that discussion. So I'm hoping, like Anna said, we will have people who can talk about that time frame.
I think Lisa, you're next, and then Diane.
Yeah,
Lisa,
so
you have your hand up.
yeah, thanks. So I was thinking, of what the management, I'm going to empathize with what I think some of the management and scientific community might need, based in part on the DCP EIR comments. So we talked about the inadequacy of the Delta method of changing weather using climate change. And I know there's a lot of new tools and new ways of doing that. So I think there's kind of two issues here. How much are the state agencies already evolving? There is this state board that's focused on climate change. And so we need to figure out what things they're already teeing up so that we don't duplicate that. But if they're not thinking about these alternative methods of projecting weather for modeling purposes, that seems like a big need for the Delta system. So I'm sure you'll get this in talking to stakeholders, but I'm wondering if, in addition to learning about what they are doing, we should be thinking about, could we elucidate some tools that could be very relevant to current management concerns? And I just have one little comment on Tom's thing. I see this as the geologist perspective, like let's really think long term. But I also know that psychologically, it's very difficult to get people to focus on that. So depending on how much we want to tie ourselves to management concerns, I mean, we're not even capable of stopping people from continuing to develop in floodplains we know are at great risk. So it's a little hard psychologically to get people to focus on these things that are really far out. It doesn't mean we shouldn't bring up the problems. Thanks.
Diane, you have your hands up.
Yeah, I think my comment is at the other end of the time frame of Tom's, in that 2050 may be too far out relative to some of the problems that are clearly being impacted by changing climate in the next 10 or 15 years. And I think that applies to HABs. And I think that applies to these measures to enhance carbon sequestration and deal with the subsidence issues, because these climate conditions influence how the wetland vegetation grows and the flooding and such. So I was going to say, maybe as we develop this, not necessarily have every problem in the Delta that might be related in the near term to climate, changing climate on the shorter time scale. Maybe we could identify a few, or one or two, so that it would be a way to be getting back to what Lisa was saying, is relevant to management actions in terms of controlling nutrients to deal with the HABs threat that, there's a monitoring program that we reviewed, and, there's work being done in that area. So giving it some focus of problems that the managers understand are related to climate change in the next 25 years.
Well, sounds like, Obi, you have your
Yeah,
hand up.
just want to, comment on, I think these are all good ideas. I just want to make sure that we don't make the scope very broad. And I think it's very important for us to, as the board, to understand what does the science say about the next few decades or next 50 years or 100 years or even beyond in terms of projections and the uncertainties. So we can then focus on the near-term management issues and longer term. I just feel like the science is evolving so fast. Every 4 or 5 years or 6, we have an IPCC report. The sea level rise projections change rapidly, and we run into that problem all the time. So I feel like we need to make sure that the board understands the state of science in terms of climate projection. Now, we do know it will change, but at least the current state of science, so we can provide some informed decision, informed recommendations on how to address and what management question we should be addressing. Because I feel like maybe compared to some other topics, we need to get a better understanding what is the current state of science. And there are a lot of people, particularly in California region, who have done a lot of work who could help us.
All right, Tom has his hand up. Tom?
Yeah, no, I agree that the workshop should be primarily focused on the science of sea level rise. But as I think about this problem, for example, the solution right now to, as I mentioned, to flooding in the Delta is levees. What we're trying with the subsidence effort in the Delta is what are called nature-based solutions. And it's quite possible that these solutions would work forever once you let the water in. So that there are long-term, well, you have a solution. The levees probably are not going to work forever as the sea level rises once we get to the really large numbers eventually. But maybe the nature-based solution does work. So there are things we can do today that are going to be better for the future than other things. And you probably don't want to get into that too much in the workshop. I thought Anna's suggestion of just having somebody maybe at the end talk about the longer term aspect. It is all we want to do at this point, but there is a management side to it, and there are solutions that we can implement today that might actually work for centuries rather than decades.
Anna?
I think this is all really useful discussion, and I think that the main tension is, Obe and others feeling that the workshop does need to be focused around the climate science so that we avoid it being so broad and so diffuse that we're really just, staying at the top rather than going deep. The second perspective is, if we literally just stop at the climate science, then perhaps we're missing an opportunity to then connect that to some of the other topics that we interface with stakeholders on, or that we've discussed and explored in the past. And I really think there's a way to accomplish both, to have the strong focus on the science, but then have additional components that have to do with implications for other things that we look at. And I think Obe and I just need to think carefully about how to accomplish that second piece to the extent that it allows us to connect to those other topics without sacrificing that core that Obe is talking about. And since since I'm speaking, I'll make my other comment / question. One thing I would enjoy hearing from people about is what should be the outcome of this workshop. There can of course be a summary of the workshop that is published, and we can provide our own perspectives and comments. Is people sense that is the sum total of what we want to do, or do we have ambitions to, for example, one thought that came to my mind is write a perspective piece that we would actually publish somewhere that would present these views in a somewhat coherent way and synthesize across topics. I don't think there's a plan to write a full report based on this in the same way as we have for some of the workshops that we held last year. But I'm just curious about people's thoughts as to what would be the right type of product, if at all, to come out of this workshop.
Virginia.
So, well, your comment wasn't there when I put up my hand, but I'll merge into that because it seems to me there are two aspects to this. What are the climate change and sea level rise projections? And then what are the mitigation actions? And I think we'd be remiss not to talk about what can be done. So in terms of outcomes, a synthesis of what realistic projections are, where there are data gaps, what needs to be done, as well as an analysis of steps that can be taken to deal with these changes so as to reduce the potential impacts.
Any other comments, responses to Anna's question?
No, I think, and I will probably try to see how we can incorporate both objectives. I do agree. I just don't want to, I want to make sure we manage the scope and the expectations. So we can even have a second workshop some other time, what to do about with the projections. I just wanted to, but I think there might be a way to integrate both types of objectives into this, at least have an initial discussion and see what agencies might be thinking about in terms of these projections. That's all I want. We'll find a way to integrate.
Diane.
Well, I agree with Obi, and one experience that I had from participating actively in both of the two workshops is that some of the benefit of these workshops is the everyone talking to each other. So there's what we write in our report, and then there's the exchange that happens right then with representatives from different entities being in the same room, listening. And so having a report or a workshop summary, I think is a really useful outcome in the near term to help those who were participating, remember what was done and said. And it needs to be timely to be useful, but there'll be people in the room, and then they'll have another meeting to go to the next week, and they'll have their scattered notes or whatever, but having a concise summary in the near term could be very useful to the participants.
Lisa.
Yeah, and I'll just build on exactly what Diane said. I agree with that completely. I think it's really nice to have some kind of take-home points. And one way we've done that in the past is have the final panel be some sort of key decision makers who've been listening to everything and talking to people, and get them to start the synthesis. And then, of course, the leads can also do some synthesis. But I think maybe some key takeaways in terms of implications would be nice in addition to the summary. If I would aim for that.
Yeah, so I raised my hands to be in line. My question that is still in my mind is the target audience. Have we discussed that? Do you know what the target audience is going to be?
to me, I would say it's the ISB and the agencies or those stakeholders who do have to worry about this near-term and long-term climate change. So it's both, I think, for us to be educated and then for us to recommend what maybe stakeholders should be thinking about. Particularly now that we are coming out of the DMDU, this might be a nice follow-up that we could have that discussion as a panel, as a decision maker panel at the end. But I would think it's a broad. I assume there are many others around the region who might be interested in having this discussion.
I think that's a really valid question, Inga, because if it's just for us versus for us and the agencies, that's quite different than if we actually want to include stakeholders more explicitly, both in terms of what science is relevant and the ways in which to present the science in a way that is more directly interesting and useful and usable to them.
Right. I mean, if it's managers, environmental managers, then maybe the direction that Diane mentioned would be more appropriate. I don't know. I'm not in the topic, but linking it to management questions. But then it becomes something maybe completely different from what you had in mind originally. So I don't want to confuse things.
I think this is all really useful input and an interesting discussion. So I think maybe Obey and I will digest the conversation from today and think about this more deeply and make a proposal that incorporates these perspectives.
Tom.
Yeah, I think as long as we keep it focused on the Delta, that will be pretty helpful in terms of narrowing it down a little bit. Sea level rise is already a big problem for California because of the coastal erosion, and that there are a few communities that are really struggling with what to do with homes that are basically at sea level, beach homes. But I think if we focus on the Delta per se, then that sort of narrows down the issues. Like how's the ecology going to change? What are the implications for the levees? I think you can narrow it down to a few big questions like that.
Yeah, Tom, I think that I also think it is important, even in the title, to mention Bay Delta region, because we don't want this to be a climate change research symposium, in and outside Delta, or like even in California or in the global level, unless those global factors affect the Bay Delta region. I think we need to focus on the Bay Delta region because we know what the hazards are.
Yeah, and the Bay has its own unique problems,
right?
Or the coastal region around the Bay does.
Right.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for this great discussion. If there are no more questions, comments, I'll ask if there are any public comments.
There are none.
All right. Then I'll ask if there are public comments for matters that are not on the agenda, but within the subject matter jurisdiction of the Delta.
There are none.
All right. Well, that just leaves an idea of what we can expect in the upcoming Delta ISB meetings. In October, which is an in-person meeting, which I look forward to, the meeting will take place right after the Bay Delta Science Conference, which is September 30th to October 2nd. And the first day we will be on a field tour in the Delta. I'm not sure where Ringe Tract is, but Staten Island sort of sounds familiar. Day 2, we will have the Delta Stewardship Council Chair and Executive Officer report. We will hear something about the Delta Plan 5-year review and the DPIC overview. And we will discuss the draft environmental justice paper, which has just been released, the current reviews, and I hope to have something new to say about the contaminants review, sorry. We will reflect on the field tour and on the Bay Delta Science Conference. Perhaps, you know, we will be inspired to review other topics in the future by that conference. In November, we will get the Delta Lead Scientist report, the Delta Lead Scientist vision, which is a tradition that we provide an opportunity for the Delta Lead Scientists to share their vision for the Delta Science Program after being in the position for a few months. Later, we will also provide an opportunity for reflections near the end of their term. Also in November, we will have Dr. Christine Whitcraft of CSU Long Beach. She will give a presentation on her project on early detection of and rapid response to invasive species in the Delta, which was motivated by the ISB's 2021 review on invasive species and funded by a DSP directed action request. So things to look forward to. There are no more questions. I'm going to ask Edmund to give us a review of items to follow up.
Yep. And just to confirm, there are also no public comments to the preparation for future meetings, just for the record.
Okay, thank you.
Items for follow-up. Today, during the chair's report, it was mentioned that the council has released the draft environmental justice and tribal issue paper. The council will be presenting that paper for discussion with the ISB at your October meeting. If there is any ISB members who wants to take the lead to help determine if written comments are warranted, just let staff know after the meeting. Today, during the presentation on the new IEP food web synthesis effort, Dr. Hartman requested Dr. Rose provide some of his comments in writing on how it's important to look at data beyond the Delta. For the food web's review, the ISB took action to finalize that review pending any additional minor edits from the board members. So if you have any, please get those in as soon as you can. And staff will work with Dr. Nyman to publish that report. For the final environmental impact report, the board also voted to submit that memo with any additional edits, and then staff will be working with Dr. Wanger to finalize that to submit to DWR. For the discussion about future activities, Tanya provided a suggestion for Inga to think about potentially having a speaker or two come to an ISB meeting to provide like kind of like an overview of like contaminants or any issues to be aware of, just so the full board is informed in addition to like the scoping discussions. For the climate science symposium, Obe and Anna will take the feedback from today and then work on public perspectives for discussion, hopefully by the next ISB meeting. Diane, do you have a question?
Yeah, I had class this morning, so if there was a vote to approve the food webs report for final release, can I vote now, or is the fact that I just wasn't there mean I don't get to vote for it?
Since it was already voted upon, you can provide your feedback now if you would have voted or voted against.
I would have definitely voted for it, and thank Bob for all his hard work, and it's awesome to have this done. Thank you.
All right. And then the last follow-up item, if you're planning to go to the Bay Delta Science Conference, please be sure to register if you haven't already. I know many of you already did that, but for those who haven't, make sure to register. And that's all.
All right.
And there are no public comments.
Okay. Thank you very much, Edmund, for that. With that, thank you for being here and for your input. And I'll adjourn the meeting.
Great first meeting, Inga.